So welcome to class 7, which is Secrets of the House. And funnily enough, class 7 is about the 7th house. It's the first time we've had that correlation. But we'll start with our chanting.
Harry, I cannot see your screen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you should be able to see it now. So we'll try again. Okay, so let's start again with welcome again to Secret of the Houses, class 7, which is on the 7th house. And we'll begin with definitely prayers to Ganesha to get rid of all these video problems today. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samapraha Nirvigyan Kurume Deva Sarvakaryesha Sarvada Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavatitam Ma Vivishai Om Shanti 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 Om Adityaye Somaye Mangale Buddhaye Cha Guru Shukra Shani Bischa Rahuve Ketave Namaha Jnana Mulam Guru Murti Puja Mulam Guru Param Mantra Mulam Guru Vakyam Moksha Mulam Guru Kripa. We continue honoring the Gurus, Krishna, Saraswati, Vedavyasa, the lineage of Vedic Gurus. Saraswati, who gives us wisdom, Vedavyasa, the first one to record the Vedas, and the tradition of holy masters going back to my guru. And honoring my most influential teachers, Sanjay Rath, Camilla Sutton, Bill Levesey, Prashtavedi, and Punja Oja. Finally, some more planetary mantras. Om Sum Suryaye Namaha, Om Sam Samaye Namaha, Om Kum Kujaye Namaha, Om Bhum Buddhaye Namaha, Om Brim Brihaspate Namaha, Om Shum Shukraye Namaha, Om Sham Shunastrayaya Namaha, Om Ram Rahuve Keta Namaha, Om Kem Ketave Namaha. So welcome Nicole. I think hopefully she's back. I know she had to leave for a second when we all had to get off. Christina is sleeping. Jamie's here. Sonara probably will come. Meg, I know, is in Portland. Kathy's here. Finally back from all her travels. Good to have you back, Kathy. John's with his family. Alexandra is I'm not sure what's going on with her. Ellen, I haven't heard from her. Charlene, I haven't heard from her either, but then they have those awful storms in the north in New York. Wu Sheng Ho is in Taiwan. I'm sure he's sleeping. Rashmi is here. And we have a new classmate member who's not here, Vikas, from New Jersey. He's going to I had some exciting news, and he's going to be helping me with Jodish tutoring at some point, but maybe he'll be joining us later. So this week we're doing Secrets of Relationship. I originally had wanted to spend more time on the Marika, and then I realized that there was so much on relationship, and love is more interesting than death. So I decided to table the information, the lesson on death. I may fit it in next week. Next week's kind of an integration week. We've actually gone over the 3 moksha houses between the videotapes and the lessons that we've had, and we'll also want to add some more material on the 8th house next week. And then we've completed the 3 kama houses. If you watch the videotape on the 11th houses, today we're doing the other kama house. And then we did the 3rd house, I think, early in the course. So we're going to try to integrate all that material, a little bit of a summary form, and then we'll add some more material next week on the 8th house and the 7th house. Then we'll also set up the upcoming weeks, which are secrets of the uh, Kona houses. So next week's going to be kind of our kind of mid-session class, and we'll kind of use it for integration. Um, the relationship class will start next Saturday at 3 p.m. It's 3 p.m. I need a little bit more time to prepare because it's Saturday, and hopefully that won't mess up too many schedules with people staying up late. I possibly can move it up. We can talk about that next week. And again, and if you would still like to get into that class, I'll still allow the early bird for you. Um, and there's more details on it. And again, such an interesting thing. And again, all these classes could be 30 weeks, but we thought that. The almanac is the first part has been published. The second part will be published on Monday. It's turned into quite a feat, and I really have to thank Jamie for helping me pull it together. She's been sending me emails at 4 o'clock in the morning, with revisions, and I couldn't have put it together without her. It's now 320 pages, and it's got really great material in it. I've never seen anybody do it. So it's not just a calendar with dates. It's actually interpretation of all the transits of all the planets for Sun, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu for the year. And it's got 60 pages on global and economic information, and it's got a lot of learning pieces on retrogrades and combustions and eclipses and a compendium of all kinds of wonderful things. So quite exciting. We are going to be shipping the final version tomorrow. Jamie, do you want to say anything about it since you've been editing it?
It's just a really excellent compilation of your work, Barry. Just as you said, just all the transits, a ton of information packed in there about Rahu, Ketu, all of the transits, through like Leo. Gosh, I'm overwhelmed with it. I mean, but in a very good way. It's turned into a really incredible piece of work. So congratulations on that.
Oh yeah, congratulations to Jamie. It wouldn't be here without her. we still have to do the final editing between now and tomorrow. Okay, and then our remedy class is starting at the end of February. It's going to be on Saturday mornings. I'm not teaching that. We're going to be gifted with Pandit Samavadula. The Nakshatra course is the next class I'm teaching this spring, starts February 25th. And that'll be after the relationship and the house courses are both over. So I'll go back to just one class a week on Sundays. That's it for sneak previews. Okay, so here's class 7, Secrets of the Seventh House. I'm entitling it Relationships or Death. Again, we decided to focus more on love this class, which is always more interesting. I think I'm hoping to next week maybe bring in 20 or 30 minutes on Secrets of Death, because I think it's kind of a fascinating topic because I think the older astrologers used to teach this, and when I had my first reading in 1985 with Chakrapani, it's just part of the reading. He said, you're going to live until you're 88. I think that took a lot of anxiety off of my mind. When you go through stuff or you're just wondering, and so if you have some idea of what your life contract is, then I think you can plan your life better. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing to learn, and we'll see. I'll spend a little time on that next week. Some people can get freaked out by it. I as a Scorpio, natural 8th house, I'm fascinated by death, and there's no such thing as death because we're eternal on the soul level. So it's just a matter of really kind of understanding that. And the interesting thing about it was one of the big secrets in Jyotish is that you can time death with it, and it was considered one of the big, that's why Jyotish was always such an occult secret knowledge, because you could actually time death with it. And again, I don't think it's something to be afraid of. I think it's something that you can really, it's useful to know. But anyway, we're not going to do that today. We're going to talk about love today. So, and again, I stand on the shoulders of many great teachers. Always with all my lessons. Camilla Sutton has given me numerous information on relationship with lectures on relationship. Joni Patri's book, Astrology, the Divine Order of the Universe. Richard Hauck has a whole book on the astrology of death. Tragically, he died early at age 53. I first published in his books in the 90s, and he tragically died in 2001 at the age of 53. So interesting that he was totally fascinated by death. One set of books that I didn't mention, which actually I haven't been referring to very much, but B.B. Raman, who is our classic Vedic astrologer, has a 2-volume set, and it really does cover all 12 houses. As you know, I'm not really fond of Indian books because they aren't always very clear, but Raman's an exception, in his the nature of what he does. Again, it's not westernized enough for my taste, but it's a good reference book. And then I've given you a copy of Astro Sutras, the relevant information, so that you have that. So our technique section today is on Bhava suchika, and I keep kind of having this fear that that we're not recording, but I know it. Let me just double check again here. Okay, it says it's recording, so we're good. Again, I had to move to this new computer, and it's just kind of so. I have brought this in last week on your slideshow. It's called Bhava suchika, and I'm thinking the best way to translate it is called house transposition, and that's when planets in the Rashi chart move into a Varga chart into another house. And it's a very important principle to learn. And in general, house transposition, whenever you're doing dashas, you always have to know when you have a relationship, that's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. So this is something that's worth memorizing. I've given it to you in other classes. So the official word in Sanskrit is called Bhava Suchika Amsha. And the technique is that you count the number of houses from the Rashi to where it is in the Varga chart. And if it moves 6, 8, or 12 houses, then there's kind of a hidden problem in the movement. And I'll practice this in a minute. One of the things that didn't transfer when I had to open this new computer was your chart. So we'll have to put them in by hand today for you. I have a couple of them only, but I couldn't get my database transferred with all the craziness going on today. So for example, if you have something in Taurus Rashi in the natal chart, and in the Navamsha chart or in the Dashamsha chart or in any of the Varga charts, it moves into Libra, then it's moving 6 houses. It moves from Taurus to Libra, and that's a 6. Now, normally you might look at your Varga chart and say, oh, you've got Mars in Libra, or you've got Saturn in Libra or something. Oh, that's wonderful. But because it's moved 6 signs from the Rashi to the Varga chart, it actually has kind of a hidden obstacle problem. So this is a really important principle, and that's why I'm teaching it to you. Again, I'm trying to teach you one technique every week that you may or may not know. So the question is how does the planet move from the Rashi chart to the Navamsha chart? That's when you use it most. You can use this principle in any Varga chart. And what does it mean? So this is the section that's worth memorizing, because you're always having to pull this stuff out of your hat. So whenever you have a Virgodama placement, same sign, same Navamsha, it means there's integrated soul placement. That means you've inherited deep qualities from past lives about this planet, and it has hidden strength, and that means that it's going to flourish. So we always like to see Virgotama planets between the D1 and the D9 because it means that the less past life lessons show deep soul placement. Um, if you have a movement of 2 signs, it obviously means material and spiritual gains. If it moves 3 signs, it means growth, courage to grow over time with this area. If it moves 4 signs, it moves happiness, being happy in this area of life. If it moves 5 signs, it means blessings and creativity in this area. Uh, if it's 6, it means blocks to achievement or now, again, as I've taught you in the lesson on the 6th house, the 6th house is an Upachaya house. So if we're disciplined with problems in the 6th house with health or regular work habits or exercise or any of those things, then we easily can overcome those blocks. But 6 means that we have to be disciplined to overcome blocks. 7 means integration of opposite values. And again, you can say relationship, it could be business relationship, as we'll learn in this 11-7s, or a lot of things actually. If it moves 8 houses, it means transformation due to unexpected events. Now that's the positive way of looking at it. 8th house, if you listen to the videotape, brings up unexpected events, and they kind of throw us for a loop, and then we're kind of forced to grow in new and unexpected ways. Sometimes they are difficult. They can cause death or land us in the hospital or something like that. But still, there's a chance for transformation if we don't see the 8th house events. If we don't understand the 8th house karma coming, then it takes us by a big surprise. But if we understand it, we can transform it even before it becomes a problem. Anytime we have a 9th house transposition, good luck and dharma will develop. 10th house action to create a good future for oneself. 11th house transposition, material and spiritual gains. We always like to see 11s. 12th house, again, the positive way of looking about 12th house is sacrifice, service, and expenditure. Again, I've always talked about the positive ways of looking at the 12th house are 12, sacrifice and service, which means we give without expecting anything. But sometimes it brings up unexpected expenses, loss and frustration to point you toward moksha. So again, these numbers are key to interpreting dashas. When the dasha lord and the bhukti lord are X number of houses apart, it also applies to comparing the Rashi chart to the Navamsha chart. So let's look at some charts to make this more concrete. Do you have any questions on that while I'm talking about it? I may have to go to my chart because I don't. We'll have to start putting your charts in, but I'm just going to start with my chart because I know it. I'm not really happy with how this is showing up. Be with that page either. Okay, well, we'll go back to. Anytime you switch computers, you don't have all your layouts. So this is my chart on the right here, Scorpio rising again with Mars in Aries. Okay, so what we want to see is what happens when the planet moves from the Rashi chart to the Navamsha chart, and what does it move? So I've got my moon in the first house debilitated. It moves in the Vamsa chart, it moves from Scorpio into Aquarius. So actually, there's 2 ways you can do Bhava suchika. You can do it by sign movement or how many houses it moves. Okay. In some cases, it can be the same, but my moon is going to be the same because I have moon in the first. But so what we have here is so my moon, which is actually moon in the first is actually a really good positioning, and later in life, after married life, my moon is in the 6th house, and and it's actually more problematic. So it might even suggest that my emotional challenges have increased. In some ways, my emotions aren't as dry as they used to be when I was younger, because at least we've gotten it out of Scorpio. Then we've moved it into Aquarius, which is still kind of a difficult place to be. We said Aquarius and Scorpio are the two places that you don't really like planets because they bring heavy karma. So my moon, throughout my life has not moved. What it has moved, it's moved from the first house to the fourth house. And what usually we like moon in the fourth house because it has Digbala, but we also learned last week about Karaka Bhava Nacha that it's actually kind of a hidden problem. So I would say that my moon, my destiny with my moon um, is still pretty challenging, and it doesn't improve in my life. So let's look at another planet here. Venus goes from Capricorn in the third house in the Rashi chart to Venus and in Mercury in the 10th house. So it goes from um, again, another sixth house movement. It's moving from Capricorn into Gemini, which is, it's moving 6 signs. It's moving from the third house into the 10th house. And so it's moved 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's actually moved nine houses. So in this case, um, um, it's slightly improved. I would say again, my Venus is my most challenging planet here because it's in that Parivartana yoga with Saturn. And what's happened with my Venus is that now it's conjunct Rahu and Saturn in the 10th. Again, it doesn't like the 10th; it wants to be in the 4th. So in the 10th, it has the opposite of Digbala, and it's moved into it's moved conjunct Rahu and Saturn. And I would say that the interpretation of this is that my relationship, again, Venus is the karaka for marriage and relationship. In my married life is that there's a lot of tension between work and home in my married life because I'm always working. My wife never sees me, and it does create a lot of tension in for my wife. I think that's kind of how I'd interpret that. Um, um, but I would say that Venus is pretty afflicted still in the Navamsha chart. Um, and then finally, uh, let's look at my Saturn. My Saturn goes from the 12th house into the 10th house. So it's moving from Libra. Um, um, so there's two, you can do this two ways. So it's going from um, Libra into Gemini, which is a movement of 9. So my Saturn actually gets stronger moving out of the 12th and into the 9th house in terms of deeper spiritual knowledge through my marriage, through in my later life, because it moves from Libra into Gemini. Now it's moving from the 12th house into the 10th house, and if you count 12 to 10, that's also it's moved 11 houses. So my Saturn has, you'd say Saturn matures with later life. My Saturn has matured also, in from the natal chart from my birth, where it was much more problematic to my later life and to my married life. Anyway, so that's my example, and I just did it quickly. Now, I hope I didn't lose you, and I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but are you familiar with this principle of Bhava suchika? Welcome, Vikas. I'm glad it's good to have you. Um, um, so, do you understand this principle that I just talked about? And I didn't want to spend a lot of time with this, but I did want to bring in a new technique here. So basically, whenever you're evaluating, we always want to use the Navamsha chart to evaluate the hidden qualities of the chart. Again, the birth chart is more what we've come into in this life, and then for most people, if you do charts of people over 35, their birth chart may not be as relevant. You have to look at the movement of what the planets are like in their Navamsha chart. And it's certainly certain when a person gets married, their Navamsha chart becomes very important. And so then what you have to do is you have to analyze what the movement has happened between the Rashi chart and the Navamsha chart to see what areas of their life grow because of marriage or because they've just matured later in life. So I don't want to spend a lot of time with that. I just wanted to bring that in. Any questions? I kind of went over that quickly, but I don't. I did talk about it once in the Navamsha class, and we'll go over it again in the relationship class. But I just wanted to bring it in because we are dealing with relationships this week. Okay. So I don't know if you understood that or not. Okay. So I want to go to our main focus today, which is the seventh house. So the Karaka for the seventh house is Venus, which we all know. It's an easy one to remember, and it refers to wife and marriage. The secondary Karaka for the seventh house is Jupiter or husband. So if you're dealing with a woman's chart, you obviously always have to look at Jupiter rather than Venus for the Karaka of the seventh house. The principle Bhavat Bhavam, if you count 7 from 7, you get the first house, which means that, the seventh house is the most fascinating house for so many reasons because, our soul, our partner becomes a reflection of ourself. And when we have trouble with our partners, it's because we see the problems that they generate from ourselves. And that's why this Bhavat Bhavam principle is important because it is giving you this hidden information. And I brought that up in the article if you read it. The natural seventh house of the zodiac is Libra. And so whenever we're thinking about the seventh house, we always have to think of Libra, and we have to think about the quality of Libra. And Libra is always about doing things together. It's about compromise. It's about sharing. And that's what marriage becomes. So the challenging planets in the seventh house is Venus is Karaka Bhava Nasha, which means it's too strong in the seventh house. We learned that last week. It just has too much sexual energy, and it kind of can get out of balance there. Mars is particularly difficult in the seventh house, and Mercury also. They're Marka Karaka Sthana, which we have learned in previous classes. Mars basically, just brings way too much aggression and fighting to relationship, which is the worst thing that the one thing you don't want. And Mercury is too mature when it's in the seventh house because we said last week that Mercury is the prince, and so he likes to get into affairs and stuff like that. And he's not very mature about commitment and marriage because he just can't settle down. So those are the two things to think about. So here's our general cookbook for the seventh house. Again, this is we always like to go deeper in our classes, but these are all the things that you look at when you look at the seventh house: wife, husband, foreign travels, family relationships, general prosperity, second child. Again, it's the first child is the fifth, the second child is the seventh. Earthly ties, business partnership, which is one that you use a lot, and we actually should spend a lot more time on that. Contracts, business partnerships, and contracts go together. So contracts, I didn't list it here, but that's an important thing of the seventh house. Seventh house is the house of enemies, so it also can be victory over enemies. In sports astrology, you look at who's stronger, the first or the seventh house, and you can use that principle in general. So very fascinating. Lawsuits can be part of the seventh house. Sexual life, sexual pleasure, semen, change of residence, depression, path of life, and death. Those are all things that you have to remember about the seventh house. Body parts, private parts, sexual organs, groin, urinary tract, uterus, pineal glands, hernia, those type of things are connected with the seventh house. Career connections to the seventh house: diplomacy, public relationships, marriage, counseling, business partnerships, all those things are things. These are just kind of general things. So we have to sort out, people always want to look at the seventh house for love and romance. But as I've talked to you in our class before, there's a lot of things you have to look at for love and romance, and we actually need to add the fourth house here, which is what we learned last week. Fourth house is family. So family life, being able to settle into family life and provide children for family life is fourth house. Fifth house is romance. So when people are unmarried and they want to get into romance, or people who are married and they're getting into affairs, that's kind of fifth house. That's romance. It's adventure. That's one of the things about the fifth house. Seventh house is general relationship and business relationship. Although you can say it's marriage, but it's I sometimes even think marriage is more important in the 12th house. Eighth house is sex. We also learn the third house is sex, and then the 12th house is sexual pleasures and sacrifice in marriage. As I've talked about in our videotape on the 12th house, sacrifice and service work are key words for the 12th house. And marriage ultimately, especially when you're bringing up a family, is about sacrifice. And so we can't ignore the 12th house when we're evaluating somebody's marriage. So I just wanted to sort this all out for you. If the 5th house and the 12th house are connected to the 7th house, then there can be affairs, or sex may become too important in the relationship. Now, I always like to have hidden things about these houses for you. So the 7th house is our back. So people who have back problems, you're looking at the 7th house. And because the 7th house also roots relationship, people who have back problems usually have relationship problems. And if they solve the relationship problems, their back problems will often go away. So remember, we learned that those connections are important. So, but the 7th house is also kind of another blind spot. We learned that the 12th house is a blind spot because it's right around sunrise, and we can't see planets in the 12th house, and it brings up our blind sides. In the same way, the 7th house represents our blind spots also, because we can't see behind our back, and we can't see our enemies sometimes. Sometimes they're hidden. And so the 7th house, planets in the 7th house also can be connected to blind spots. We just don't clearly see them. The 1st house and the 7th house come together, right? They're one package. People who develop back problems usually have relationship problems. The pain in your back is usually a relationship pain, as I just explained before. Now, if we get into the article that I wrote, people always want to. I was really kind of digging deeply into understanding the 7th house and secrets of a relationship. And one of the things that our parents have kind of built into our life is that we're meant to have lifelong partners, and that may not be realistic in modern society, and that may be part of a different generation. And certainly, I'm not advocating, jumping from partner to partner or bailing from your relationship or your marriage when it doesn't work. But sometimes relationships do expire. Business relationships expire. Contracts expire. Sometimes the things that we need to learn in a marriage are completed, and our life contract is set up so that something will be destroyed. Shiva will enter to destroy the old, so something new can come. So I just wanted to throw that in there because it happens a lot. 50% of the population gets divorced, we have to realize that most people, particularly in the United States, come in with a lot of relationship karma. They don't have the sacrifice energy. I mean, even when people sometimes have children together, they get divorced because they can't master the 12th house energy of sacrifice that it takes to get through a marriage. And it's a hard one, and that's why relationships are so hard. The big thing about relationship is that our partner should teach us about ourselves. And if we're not able to see that mirror, then and we're in too much pain, and it may be time for a new mirror. But that new mirror will still force us with the same problems. So that's why this first and seventh house relationship, and the Bhavat Bhavam relationship, the seventh house is always about ourself. Um, really means that our relationship is about self-discovery. It should lead to learning more about who we are, and the imperfections that we see in our partner are usually our own imperfections that we can't deal with. I mean, anybody who's been in a relationship is familiar with that. Relationships are a mirror. Um, Saturn gets Digbala in the seventh house, which is the natural seventh house of Libra. To me, this was kind of a revelation when I was thinking about it. I have Saturn in Libra, and I'm very responsible in relationship, and I have endurance. Because Saturn, you just wouldn't think that Saturn in the seventh house is going to be good for relationship. Um, and if it has good dignity there, it does create this ability to be responsible. It can lead to longevity in relationship. And it means that Saturn is mature in relationship, and that's why Saturn is exalted in Libra, the natural seventh house of the zodiac. So many people run from one bad relationship to another because they blame the other partner rather than taking responsibility for not doing their part to create success. So, you know, um, when people are challenged in relationship, it means like we have to dig deep, we have to work harder, we have to take responsibility for what we're doing wrong in the relationship. If our Saturn is immature in the chart, if it's even if it's debilitated in the seventh house or something, then it may not have the right energy to kind of know how to be responsibility. If it gets too agitated, it wants to change too quickly. But when you kind of jump around in relationship, it just becomes a maddening dance in your inability to reconcile your dark shadow, and you end up blaming others rather than taking responsibility for what you did wrong. So that's why Saturn is in the seventh house is a gift, particularly if it's strong in a chart, because it means that we're able to take responsibility, we're able to have mature relationships, we're able to look at ourselves and to transform. Um, Everybody knows that Venus, love, and relationships are connected to the seventh house, but the key to the seventh house is self-love. If we can love ourselves enough, then we can put up with any of our partner's imperfections. So, that's always one of the one of the things that we learned is that wherever we put Venus, wherever it aspects, it tends to love that particular area. So, in a sense, people who have Venus in the first do really well with relationship because they have a lot of self-love and they have a lot of love for partner, the first aspecting the seventh. So, um, it's one of those placements that you really like. And I also like Jupiter in the first for that same reason. I think when you have benefics in the first house, and if the first house lord is relatively unafflicted and well placed, then there can be enough self-love to kind of deal with your partner's imperfections, because your partner's imperfections are not reminding you of your own imperfections. So that's always kind of the key with relationships. You have to love yourself, and you have to be grounded enough in yourself that you can put up with your partner's imperfections. I'm very blessed. My wife has Jupiter in the seventh house in the first house in Libra, and she's just a master of relationships for that reason. But it's also because she's just, I think she has enough self-love that she just puts up with my own imperfections too. So I think it's very powerful. If you have a strong first house, then you can be more in touch with yourself, your own love, your own self-love, and then you can accept your partner. Um, Now, the seventh house is a karma house. We've been doing the series of karma houses: third house, seventh house, 11th house, and this is the final karma house, which is a house of desire. And karma, sometimes gets bad connotations with sex, like the Kama Sutras, but karma just is about pleasure. And you know, in relationships, we have to move beyond self-gratification and personal need and to give unconditionally to be successfully. And so it becomes a challenge to kind of move in that direction. If the relationship has just started for sexual reasons with no sense of sacrifice, some people have really strong sexual energy together and they get married because the sex is incredible, but then they don't have the ability, they don't have other abilities. The relationship falls apart. So you know, that can be a problem with the relationship if the sexual energy is all that is there and there aren't the abilities to some of these other qualities that are needed. I think we need a strong 12th house to have a sexual a successful marriage, because the 12th house is about sacrifice. It's sacrificing for your partner's needs. It's sacrificing for children, and if you can do that, it can lead to moksha or enlightenment. And the final goal of marriage is to find God in our partner, and our partner to find God in us. My wife and I put this in our wedding vows, and you know, we got married. I got married at age 42. My wife was 50, and it was our first marriage for both. And we were both really interested in self-realization and enlightenment and in serving the divine. And our relationship, you know, became, you know, whether we could find God in our partner and whether our partner can find God in us. And I think that's the highest. You know, people look for soulmates, which, you know, are very elusive. But ultimately, if you do marry a soulmate and um, have that ability to see God in your partner, you can use your marriage for enlightenment, and that's really the highest purpose that marriage can move to. It rarely happens, maybe in final lifetimes. Um, you know, we said the natural seventh house is Libra, and Libras want to do everything together. And so we have to kind of learn in relationship not to be selfish and ego-based, as with Aries, the natural first house. So there's this big tension between Aries and Libra. I've got Mars in Aries, and my wife has, you know, Jupiter and Libra, and she's Libra. And my ascendant Lord is Scorpio. So I have a lot of wanting to do things alone. I'm alone, you know, I'm kind of the lone ranger sometimes. I just don't share enough. I don't tell my wife what's going on. And I get into trouble because, you know, and she wants to do everything together. And the opposition between Aries and Libra is very kind of challenging in that, like I said, you know, I can be a lone wolf and want to do everything myself, and my wife wants to do everything together, to the point where it kind of can be a little bit, I wouldn't say a waste of time, but like, you know, sometimes um, you know, it's difficult. And I think ultimately, you know, the sacrifice energy which has to come in is really like, can I bend my ego, the Mars Aries energy, to kind of sacrifice in relationship and do it together, even though I'm selfish and want to do it my own way separately because I'll get it done quicker. But, you know, Aries wants to be quick with things, and you know, I'm still learning that one, and I'm not really good at it yet. But ultimately, Libra, the natural seventh house, wants to do it together, and we have to learn how to share in relationship, and that leads to self-discovery. The other thing, you know, that happens in relationship, obviously, is we tend to search for partners um, because that give us meaning, and when the partner validates us, it's as if we suddenly say, I exist and have meaning. And so, you know, what happens is when relationships get into this difficult place where the partner is tearing apart the other person, you know, that's the most destructive thing that can happen, because the person needs the self validation of what he's doing and not existing. And so the most important thing in relationship is that you always have to support whatever your partner is doing with deep enthusiasm, even if you disapprove of it. I mean, when you start turning down your partner, you may disagree with what your partner is doing, but you know, everybody wants validation. They want to know that what they're doing exists. And you know, you have to kind of, if you can't do that in a relationship, you're going to fail miserably. Um, and sharing has become such a huge thing in the world. You know, Facebook has brought it to the and social media. sharing who we are, what we like, getting liked, living, showing our talents and getting liked on Facebook. These are all basic seventh house energies, because everybody has this need to be accepted, to show that they exist, that they're valid, that they're liked. The seventh house is also about business contracts and commitment. Do we honor our contracts in love and business, or do we break them? I mean, it's the same thing. Do we relationships fall apart if there's a lack of trust, if we don't share if we don't speak the truth, if we don't do well. And that's why I think Jupiter does so well in the first seventh axis, because and Jupiter and Saturn too, for that matter, because they bring maturity and truth to the relationship, and they bring success because we're able to kind of share the truth and keep our word. When we don't keep our word with our partner, when we don't share our or what's going on with us, we lose this trust element, and that's why we want Jupiter in the first for successful business relationships and business contracts if you're doing Muhurta. Even in business, it's kind of like, is each partner contributing equally? Are they doing what they said they did? And if that doesn't happen, then a divorce happens in the business contract also. It's the same thing. I mean, that's why they're very connected. Of course, Libra, the natural seventh house of the zodiac, is always about compromise, balance, and fairness. And this becomes the most difficult thing to learn in relationship, because if you're so set on it has to be my way, then you get in, there's no compromise. I mean, one of my teachers reminded, somebody did a study, there's 32 different ways that you could wash dishes. And I don't know if you're married and you've had a fight with your spouse about the fact that he didn't wash dishes the way that you wash dishes, and yours is the only one right way. If there's only one right way in a relationship, that's Mars and that's ego, and that's going to destroy the relationship. Venus has to come in there. There's more than one right way. Can I accept that my partner wants to wash dishes completely different than I wash dishes? And that's part of basic compromise. And so the seventh house, again, is always about, relationship is always about sharing our feelings and our intimate desires. And one of the successful things that I learned in relationship seminars that I took is that men in particular have to listen to what their spouses are sharing. It's very important for women to kind of share what's on at their day, what they're feeling. And more than, men are really good at wanting to fix things. My wife will bring up a number of problems, and what I'll immediately try to do is try to fix them, because that's what guys do. We like to fix things. That's Mars. We like to change things and fix things. But Venus just wants intimate sharing. She wants to be listened to, that she's having these difficult things. So if you want to be successful in marriage, particularly for a man, you have to listen to your wife without interrupting, without trying to fix. And it's very hard to do. I'm still working on that one. The seventh house is the house of enemies and competitors. I used to be really into sports and baseball. I still am a little bit, but I used to actually predict which sports team would win. And the way you would do it is you'd run the chart for the start of the game, and you'd say, is the first house lord stronger than the seventh house lord? The first house is the home team. The seventh house is the opponent, the enemy, the competitor. Which one is stronger? And this is quite fascinating and fun to play with if you're a guy, but we're not going to do a course on that. So I just mentioned it for fun. Now the first house is sunrise, and the seventh house is sunset. So it's kind of a difficult time of the day, and that's why I think the seventh house is so difficult in some ways. Again, it's our blind spot. We can't. In fact, I was just driving a couple weeks ago, and the sun comes down really early now at 4:30 or 4, and the sun was totally in my eyes, and I couldn't see a car coming behind me. And luckily, he saw me, but I was totally blinded. And that's kind of what happens at sunset. But it's kind of the magical thing about the seventh house is that as the darkness approaches, as sunset approaches in our seventh house, we lose our identity and merge, and that's ultimately that in sexual union that can be a wonderful experience. Is that merging element? Um, in medical astrology, the seventh house is kidneys, which is also connected to Libra, and also female sexual organs. Like male sexual organs are actually eighth house. So when people are coming with problems with menstruation and reproduction, you look at the seventh house. But for men who have male-oriented problems with erection or things like that, you'd have to look at the eighth house. So ultimately, the seventh house is learning compromise and coming together to create something together. There's a bit of a scientist in me, and if you have any science in you at all, when you get a sine wave and a cosine wave, which means you have two opposite values, they cancel you out, and you have nothing. But sometimes you get two sine waves together, and then it amplifies the sine waves, and then you get a bigger amplification, and something comes out. When my wife and I got married, somebody spoke at our wedding, and they said, when you do a business partnership, it's not just that 2 and 2 is 4, is that 2 and 2 becomes 7, and that's that sine wave amplification, which means that you want when a relationship really works, it creates something bigger than was there before. A business partnership, when it works, the merging creates something bigger than that's not there, and that's that sine wave amplification, and that's very powerful. You don't want the cosine amplification. That's where the person is always negating you. You want to do it this way, they do it the other way, and you end up going nowhere because you just cancel out the wave entirely, and that happens. And that's why the seventh house is often called a marika. A marika means a killer. And when relationships don't work, they literally kill us. And then when you talk to people going through divorces, and the level of deep suffering and illness that comes up is just unfathomable, and the amount of pain that comes up in a divorce. Because when it doesn't work, it literally kills you. So if you read my article on relationship, we have to remember that our goal in life is not to change our partner. I mean, just half the time when I do relationship compatibilities, people have said, is so and so going to change? Well, the real question to ask: are you going to change and accept your partner's imperfections? People don't change. I mean, sometimes they change, but all the amount of work it takes to change somebody is years of frustration. And in the end, if you look at people who've been married for a long time, people don't change that much. And if you don't accept people, then you become miserable. When we don't, we fall into this fallacy of unconditional love, but this also can turn into codependent sacrificial quicksand where we slowly die. And this is the type of thing when the 12th house doesn't work, where our personal ambitions to raise our family and continue the lineage are subverted by, let's say, Mars, who just, is not willing, is going to pursue his own personal delights and not surrender to the family. So, but there is sometimes this naive problem with unconditional love, thinking that it can happen. Ultimately, it needs to happen, but it doesn't always happen. If your partner creates a shadow dance, which means they kind of trigger you, it means it means you have to look at your own imperfections. If I'm really angry at my partner, is it because I don't do the things that I'm angry at her for? So sometimes my wife doesn't do the dishes, and sometimes, but I'm pretty lazy and I don't do the dishes either. If I get angry at her for not doing the dishes, then I need to be angry at my own sloppiness too. So we always have to use our partnership as a mirror to see our own imperfections, and if we can do that rather than blame our partner, then our relationship becomes this fun, exciting treasure hunt. And you can find the buried treasure. You can discover about yourself, and marriage should really lead to self-discovery. So the secret of the seventh house is to let go of being too critical. Venus is debilitated in Virgo. If you have Venus in Virgo, then you're way too picky about your partner. I mean, you almost never, if you want to marry somebody with Venus in Virgo, because they're just way too critical, and they're going to pick their partner to death because they haven't learned how to compromise. They haven't learned Venus in Libra. They haven't learned how to accept. And that criticism just kills a relationship. What we have to do is we have to kind of, as I just said, we have to discover our own imperfections. We have to see why is our partner pushing our buttons, and then our only true soulmate is our own soul, right? If we can love ourselves, and then we can kind of become our own soul. But relationship can be exciting, but we have to remember it's kind of like this foreign territory. It's like the land of Oz. It's the place of dreams and hopes, and it's very exciting. But we have to remember that it comes with all the challenges. In reality, people want to find their soulmate, but do you really want someone exactly like yourself? Are you going to be bored to death? I mean, actually, in the relationship course, that one of the things that we'll learn is that one of the best compatibility is having an 11-3 relationship where your partner is you have they're 11 and 3 houses from each other. But two Libras marrying each other actually do really well together. It's one of the better combinations that you want. Or two Scorpio. Sometimes people do well if they marry themselves. They even do. Sanjay Roth told me in his relationship class that the 11-3 relationship is the best because it's friends. Our partner becomes our best friend, and that's particularly good. So the key with the relationship then is accepting. People come with two sides of the same coin. Everybody has their good and their bad sides. Sometimes we don't see the bad side of a person until 5 years into the relationship, and then it becomes a shock, and we can't believe that bad side, and we want to leave because we can't believe it's there. But everybody has a kind of a dark side and a shadow, and ultimately it comes out. I know I had a good friend in Sedona, and he was one of my best friends, and I failed to do. We needed to buy a house very quickly, and he was a realtor, and I called him up to give him the business, but he didn't have a secretary. His phone wasn't working. He had gone to Disneyland and not told anybody. And when he got back, and I had to jump at this house. And when I got back, he turned 180% on our relationship. How dare you go to another realtor, and not give me the business? And it turned out the relationship that we had, our friendship, was all about getting my real estate business. And and that was a shock. And that came after 4 years of friendship. But I felt badly, but in the end, it was, I didn't do anything wrong. But I think you have to kind of remember that people have both sides and have imperfections. So I'm going to take a break here. This was a lot of theory, but I wanted to. It's kind of. Do you have any questions? The rest of the class will be of astrology, but inevitably people who want information about relationship, need to kind of understand kind of really deep principles. I tried to bring them out in that talk, and we'll go deeper in the relationship course starting next week. Any questions or comments? Any sharing? Okay. You're all introspective. You all know this stuff, right? It's good.
Barry, I have a question.
Yeah.
With Venus and Jupiter, as far as like representations for like same-sex marriage or just like girlfriends or live-ins, would you still look at them as significators?
Yeah,
for
yeah.
committed relationships that maybe not necessarily, signed on paper, I guess.
Right. Yes. 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 The answer is yes.
Okay.
I'm getting an echo here, but a relationship that lasts, where you live together is, even in Vedic astrology, considered a marriage. I mean, sometimes people live together for a year and maybe they may split up, but that may be the first marriage, and the second marriage may, would be the ninth house. So you do have a live-in situation kind of as a marriage. It's of a strong, committed, has a strong link. And we'll have some stuff on gay relationships in the relationship course too, but it's usually a male relationships also, and so you often have to look at this in Jupiter, because they're always represented.
Okay.
Okay.
Then I had another question.
Yeah.
With regards to which chart you'd be looking at to gauge a relationship, do you go with the Rashi first, and then if a marriage occurs, then the Navamsha, the D9 activates? Is that right? And then if they would separate or get divorced, do you go back to the Rashi? How does that work?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's something I don't know if I've ever been taught this. I've been looking at it because I have some good friends that are going through a divorce, and I've been looking, counseling them and looking at their charts for a long time. And basically, the man's chart is just totally brought to life by the marriage. His Navamsha chart is really brought to life, but his Rashi chart is very, very difficult, and so the marriage has kind of saved him. And I do think now that his wife is divorcing him, that he's going to go back to his Rashi chart and to the utter failure, that the lessons that he hasn't learned. So that's my experience. Looking at that. It's fascinating. Yeah,
So it would be the same principle as like if you would move, you're moving in your relationship, just like if you would move like location wise, house wise, and change. I'm thinking,
right.
Changing like time zones. So it kind of works the same way.
Yeah, but you always, the multi-dimensions course, I didn't spend enough time talking about the Rashi chart because everybody studies the Rashi chart forever. But in the end, the Rashi chart is 50 or 60% of the chart. You always have to go back to the Rashi chart, and just about everything is always in the Rashi chart. It's that you fine tune it in the Varga charts and in the Navamsha chart. You get more information, and the whole thing with the Rashi chart is that if the Rashi chart promises something great, and it's not in the Navamsha chart because you got 12 houses or debilitated planets or something like that, then it's just, there's always this hope that it's going to happen, but it's not going to manifest because it's not in the Varga chart. On the other hand, in the rule is like if it's in the Rashi, if it's not in the Rashi chart and it's in the Varga chart, it has that same kind of effect that someone is someone has this kind of inner hope that it's going to happen because it's kind of there on a subtle level, but it's not strong enough in the Rashi chart to kind of manifest. Good question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So okay, I'm going to mute you guys now. So I want to go back to, I'm going to try to do this every week, to this Bhavat Bhavam principle, which I'm calling extrapolated movements. And that's because we talked about last week that, if you want to look at your father's father, you look at the ninth from the ninth. If you want to look at your father's wealth, you look at second from the ninth. So whenever we think of the seventh house, we have to think about those extrapolated things because sometimes people ask about these issues and you have to know where to look. So here's some of the other meanings of the seventh house, which are connected to, from this, what I call extrapolated movements. So career in the seventh house. The seventh house is the 10th from the 10th. So career issues also need to be studied in the seventh house. And this is something that people forget to do a lot. Whenever you're looking at career, you always have to, you don't just look at the 10th house, you look at the 7th house also, because it's the 10th from the 10th. So, and I'm sorry, the 7th house is the 10th from the 10th, right? So that will give you more indications about career. And one of the principles we learned we always learned in astrology is that we can't ever look at one thing. So, some people think, oh, that his 10th house is wonderful. He's got an exalted sun there. He's going to have a great career, but then he's got a debilitated Saturn in the 7th. And there are all these other factors. So never get caught up looking at just one thing because you end up messing up the interpretation. You have to look at 3 or 4 things. Then you have to go to the Varga charts. But when you get like confirmation in 3 or 4 different places, then you can say, oh my God, this is a great chart for career. You've got exalted sun in the 10th, and you've got this great 7th house placement with Jupiter there, and your 10th house Varga chart, you've got Jupiter exalted in the 10th house. I mean, your career is really going to take off when you get to your Jupiter period. So you always have to look for multiple factors because life is usually this awful mixture of it's good one place but it's not good someplace else. Home in the 7th house. So the 7th house is the 4th from the 4th. So just to understand your home, your inner private self, your mother, your maternal grandmother, your home away from home, you need to analyze the 7th house. So your vacation home can be the 7th house. Your grandmother is the 7th house. Your mother's mother is the 7th house. So you have to remember, again, that's another extrapolated placement. The 7th from the 7th is the 1st. We talked about this already. The marriage partners become a reflection of us in a mirror to see how we show up, and usually we don't like it. So that's really the big thing. We said the 4th from the 4th is the 7th, which is our grandmother. The 10th from the 10th is the 7th, so it represents how we do business in our business relationships. So maybe, for sure, always look at business relationships in the 7th house. The 6th from the 7th is the 7th house, so that indicates money earned from service work, including health, services, and restaurants. So if you're a doctor, or if you're a health practitioner, or if you run a restaurant, then actually the 2nd from the 6th is how you earn your money, the 7th house. And the 2nd from the 6th is money derived from everyday work. So if we want to look at raises, sometimes you have to look at the 7th house. So you're getting a Jupiter or a Venus aspect to the 2nd house. Is the dasha of the 7th house coming up? It may not mean that a relationship is coming. Maybe if there's a benefic relationship coming up in the 7th house, then you may get a raise at work. So again, these are like hidden things. They're not things that you get often, but they're important. You get questions about them all the time. The 5th from the 3rd is also your 7th, so it represents our youngest siblings' children. If you're looking at your nieces and nephews, from your youngest child, you may want to look at that. It's very interesting. My first nephew is Taurus rising, and I'm the 5th from my 7th house is Taurus. So it's very interesting. He is. If I knew this many years ago, I would have said, oh, I'm going to have my first nephew is going to be very stubborn, and he's going to be really interested in business, and he's going to be very material, and he's got Rahu and Taurus also. And he's going to be very self-centered. I could see that all from my chart, but that's what happened when the first nephew came. It's very interesting. So the 7th house is the 3rd from the 5th house, so it's also our second-born child. So when you're looking at first child is 5th house, second child is 7th house. So important thing to know. 3rd from the 5th is also our ability to communicate and write contracts. So on an emotional level, the 8th from the 12th is the 7th house, and that's why people want relationships to end their own loneliness or sorrow. So to me, that's kind of fascinating, and people often, rather than deal with their own energies, they seek to kind of deal with a solution to their own loneliness by finding a relationship, the 7th house. And it can work. It can work if it's the right one, and if it doesn't work, it kind of kills us, right? And the 12th from the 8th is the 7th house, so that's why the 7th house is a Marika. It kills us in a 7th house period. More extrapolated versions, 11 from the 9th is gains from father, 9 from the 11th. Again, this is kind of endless. This is a little bit cookbook, but I want you to have it in writing. So the 7th house is a Marika. The 2nd and the 7th houses are called Marika. That means they're death inflictors. And that means at the time of your death, depending on how long you're supposed to live and when your contract is up, you may become ill in a 7th house dasha if your time isn't up. And if you are supposed to die, then the 7th, the Lord of the 7th will often kill you, or the Lord of the 2nd. And so I think we'll look at that more next week. I think it's important to know. So hopefully we'll do that next week. And at the time of a person's death, you'd be running the dasha of the 7th or 2nd house lord, or planets placed in the 7th, or have associations with the 8th house. So when you get these 7th, 2nd, and 8th connections, and the person's really old, and you get malefic transits to their 7th house, or their 2nd house, you'll often. I'm actually very good at timing death, and it's actually kind of difficult to do that. It must be my Scorpio quality. We'll do more about Marikas next week, I think, just because I think they're important. But if you're interested in the astrology of death, Richard Houck, as I mentioned earlier in the course, wrote a definitive book called The Astrology of Death. And it's really a masterpiece. I don't think anybody has really kind of touched it since then. It was written in 1999. Probably everything is still in print. You can usually find it. So now let's get into more kind of relationship stuff on a kind of a general level. Actually, there's not much to say here. So the 7th house is called Jaya Bhava if you go to the Parashara. Jaya means wife. So Bhava is house. So Jaya reflects marriage partners and not just wife. So the 7th house relates to relationships, and this is how it's most looked at. But as I pointed out to you, it's a fallacy just to look at marriage from just the 7th house. Now the reason the 7th house is a Marika because the 7th house also shows where our energy goes. And if you're married, or if you know about relationships take an extraordinary amount of energy. You have to spend an extraordinary amount of time with your partner. If you're in a sexual relationship with your partner, that can expend a lot of energy. So there's a lot of expenditure of energy in the 7th house. And that's why when relationship doesn't work, it's kind of a Marika. It takes so much energy, it kind of drains you. When relationship does work, again, we said it's the two sine waves multiplying, and it really can kind of become this huge wave of amplification. And you do meet people that have those kind of relationships, and they do exist, and we shouldn't give up on them, but we have to learn our lessons to have them. So the reason the 7th house is a Kama house is that the soul gets entangled in worldly relationships and sometimes forgets its true purpose in life, and then that kind of blocks it from spiritual realization. And in a sense, that's why when some people get divorced and they're on a deep spiritual path, that break may bring them back to God. They may start going to meditation again. They may spend more time. So I don't want to negate the value of relationship, especially for marriage and children, and it really can be wonderful. But when it doesn't work, it really can take us away from our spiritual path. And traditionally, in the Vedic lifespan, people, at 60, their kids get married, and they're often they often go off, become sannyasis, and go back on their spiritual path because they've finished their commitment in marriage if they've been successful and sacrificial. But there sometimes is a little bit of a the 7th house is a Kama house, and the Kama house is about pleasure, and it's about I don't want to ever say it's the lowest of the Purusharthas, but it is considered it. I mean, people whose lives are just about pleasure, and you sometimes meet people like that, have no spiritual bones in their body, and they're not interested in other things. Inevitably, when their relationships break up and their pleasure is gone, they're really kind of devastated. It should force them to move on to a higher spiritual realm, and that's often the purpose when divorce happens. Um, in other words, are we so attached to our relationship that we forget that we're here to realize God? So, in a sense, we do have to move beyond seventh house karma if we're going to, unless we can marry our soulmate and our soulmate does move us toward finding God in them. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this. So let's talk a little bit about planets in the seventh house. If you remember from the last couple of weeks, we've talked about how the owner of the second house is not nearly as important as the planet in the house, because the planet in the house kind of takes over with its energy. Now, it turns out that no planet is really considered good in the seventh house. The sun creates marital disharmony, but it may create loyalty. Sometimes it can create distance in a relationship. The moon creates fickleness. Mars often will lead to divorce in the seventh house. We'll have a whole lesson on Kuja dosha in the relationship class. Mercury leads to multiple relationships. People are never, Mercury likes, more than one thing. So they want Mercury in the seventh house, likes to play. It likes affairs. It likes multiple partners. Even Jupiter and Venus in the seventh house can be prone to affairs. Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu in the seventh house bring up deep karmic issues. Sometimes, Saturn, as we said, can create responsibility. Sometimes if you have a strong Saturn in the seventh house, you'll find that the marriage is really dry. They're committed, they kind of stay together. There's not a lot of love, but they have responsibility to their children, they're committed. Rahu and Ketu are the most, we'll have a whole lesson on Rahu and Ketu in the relationship course, because to me, Rahu and Ketu in the seventh house axis creates the most difficult dance, because Rahu in the first house tends to want to require a lot of attention. And put Ketu in the seventh house, they have to marry a devoted partner. I call it the rock star fan syndrome. If the rock star doesn't have a devoted partner, he's going to be in trouble. Ketu in the first house, same thing. Ketu in the first house may be a very kind of has to be a very devoted person to his partner, and his partner is going to be charismatic and out there, and he has to kind of being able to not shine in the limelight. And so there's a whole kind of karmic dance that has to happen there. So more specifically, if we look at planets in the seventh house, so again, I like to use Bill Levicy's. We'll look at your charts in a little bit. We'll take a break and do that. But planets in the seventh house. Sun in the seventh house is favorable in Aries, Leo, and Jupiter-ruled signs and Jupiter aspects. So I'm using the Bill Levicy model that when the planet's strong, it can bring out the better qualities. When the planet's weak, it brings out the more difficult qualities. So again, and that's a reminder that we always have to look at dignity when we're evaluating a chart. So people with Sun in the seventh house are good business people. They may provide leadership in partnership and success in that way. We may attract partners who have a strong leadership ability. And that's so if you have a strong Sun, so, I just told you that no planet does well in the seventh house. Inevitably, you can find all kinds of charts with people with planets in the seventh house. And if the planet has dignity, then there's some good things that can happen. And so unfavorable Sun in the seventh house, Libra, Capricorn, Aquarius, connected to Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, controlled by aggressive partners, possessive of partner, frictions in business, will feel some commitment to relationship even if it's not working. part of me, I always tell you I don't want to do cookbook Jyotish, and so I'm going to let you go through this list yourself. This is stuff that is kind of cookbook Jyotish. You should learn it because it comes up right all the time, and you want to be able to say something meaningful off the top of your head. But I don't think we need to go over it in class. I think you can just read my notes on it. But I do want to go over signs in the seventh house, because this is the second part of my technique section. And I think most of you know how to do this, but intuitively. But one of the things that I first learned in Vedic astrology is that houses are more important than signs. But houses are 75% and signs are 25%. But when you're trying to give a specific reading, when you can interpret the sign in terms of what it means for the house, it gives you a very specific, colorful meaning that hits home in your analysis. So I gave you the cookbook Astro Sutras, which has what the planet means when it owns that house. So, but this principle can be applied to every single house that we've talked about. As I mentioned when we did fourth house last week, my fourth house is owned by Aquarius. Aquarius is always foreign things, right? Connected to Rahu. I have always had foreign cars. I have no interest in American cars. And not that that's a useful thing to tell somebody, you're going to only buy foreign cars, but it's kind of intriguing because the information is embedded in the signal information. So you always want to see what deeper information you can bring out by the sign that's involved. And when we're looking at relationship, is the seventh house a dual sign? Is it a fixed sign? Is it a movable sign? Because those give you information. So we always want to analyze the quality of the sign in anything that we do, and that's one of our techniques for the Secrets of the House courses because it gives us more information. Now, this is my hidden insight here. Is I think the dual signs, which are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces, have innate relationship problems because the seventh house is Bhaudika. We learned that in the Bhaudika lesson. Bhaudika means there's some deeper karmic influence. Now, the Bhaudika may not be that powerful if there's no malefic energies connected to it, but there's still some kind of archetypal Bhaudika energy, which means, immediately you see Sag rising in the chart, you kind of want to think, okay, relationship issues, and then you look deeper and see if it comes up more. I think Mars and Venus ascendants have an easier time with relationships than dual signs. Yes, there's a big dance between Mars and Venus always, between ego and being together, and they have their own dance. But I do think that I think they have a little bit easier time with relationships. And I think the Saturn owned signs are always at odds with the Sun and the Moon. The Sun and the Moon tend to marry. The Saturn owns the seventh house, Capricorn and Aquarius for Leo, and Cancer the seventh house, and they tend to be attracted to foreign partners, and inevitably that brings its own kind of challenges whenever you marry a foreigner. But I think Saturn-owned signs are much more at odds with. So Leos and Cancers and Capricorn and Aquariuses, I think, have a much deeper time with relationship problems because there's a central trust issue. Saturn, is always, so trust becomes a central issue when you're looking at those signs. So I'm going to go through these quickly. They also are kind of cookbook Jyotish, but so you have this information. It actually is not in the Astro. It is in the handout I gave you in class 2. So when Aries owns the seventh house for Libra rising, I want to do this because I want us to practice thinking about what does that mean. You want to immediately look at what does the quality of the sign mean. So Libra inherently attract fighters and conflicts despite their peace-loving nature because Mars owns two Marikas, the second and the seventh house, Scorpio and Aries. So it's very kind of funny that Libras want peace and they want togetherness and they want compromise, but because Mars owns the seventh house, they inherently attract people who want to fight. So it's something you have to remember when you're looking at a Libra chart. They may attract useful partners with lots of energy, but they may be selfish or controlling if Mars gets afflicted and caught in ego. And there's not wanting to do things together. Again, I've got Mars in Aries and my wife has got Libra rising, and I can be very selfish about my time and the way I want to do things. And I after 20 years of marriage, I'm still like that. People don't change. She puts up with it. but Aries partners will be restless in marriage, and that could become a war zone. Aries is kind of a real active sign, right? It just likes competition. It likes sports. It likes to move. Likes, it's not, doesn't settle into marriage real easily, right? So Aries owning the seventh house, Taurus owning the seventh house for Scorpio rising, right? So if Venus is strong, it could lead to a lasting marriage. Again, because Taurus is a fixed sign, right? Taurus is the most earthy sign. It's steady. Tauruses are very sweet. If you're a Scorpio rising and you end up with a Taurus partner, it can be very powerful. Often, there's a very sexual connection with Scorpio Taurus because they're both very sexual signs. And if that's important in the relationship, that energy can work for the person if there are other things going on. The problem with Taurus rising is, Scorpios are very they're very spiritual people. I'm Scorpio rising. I mean, I'm interested in moksha. It's the sign most interested in moksha. I'm married to my seventh house is Taurus, and my wife is very material. I mean, and it's very interesting. I've had to accept it. When I lived in Sedona, I was Libra, and we were both Libras. We actually had a lot of material growth together, and we were both interested in material growth. And I put all our money into the houses and stuff like that. Back here, I'm Scorpio rising, and all my life is about spirituality, and there's still some strong interest in buying things, and I'm it's at odd. It's like I'm interested in in God, and my wife wants to buy the latest fashion, and that's fine, and that's the dance that happens between Scorpio and Taurus. Sometimes Taurus is just more material. Gemini owning the seventh house for Sagittarius rising may lead to more than one marriage. Again, Gemini likes to create two, the twins, or more than twins, multiples. So the dual signs sometimes get caught up in multiple marriage. And because Mercury owns the seventh and the 10th houses, they may attract partners who are too interested in career, and so this becomes a problem. So again, here's a principle that I was trying to bring out in teaching you about signs is what other house is involved in the house ownership. So you're looking at the seventh house, but Gemini also owns the 10th house. So the relationship will automatically attract partners who are interested in careers, and that may be a problem for Sagittarius because they're very spiritual beings and they want, they're very religious beings and they may be more interested in, there's always this balance that has to happen. If Gemini owning the seventh house, parents is, if Mercury is afflicted, Geminis can be deceptive and fickle and oversex, natural ownership of the third house. And that may, you better make sure there's sexual compatibility if you're Sag. Boudica quality if afflicted by malefics. So there's some deep hidden card and problem. Remember I told you the dual signs have this really difficult problem with relationships. Sometimes Sagittarius is very ethical and moral and religious, and that's at odds with Gemini's sensual nature and desire for multiple partners. And so there can be a block between, there's an innate conflict between your ethics and values and maybe your partner's values, and that can lead to problems. Cancer owning the 7th house for Capricorn rising. Capricorns cannot handle the fluctuating change emotions of the moon when they are used to stability and conservative and steady motion. Capricorn is too practical to deal with the mysterious and sensitive and emotional moon. So, as I said, there's this real, Capricorns are so practical and businesslike, and Cancers are very emotional and mysterious, and there's this kind of innate tension that's there, and that's why, I think Saturn-owned signs often have trouble with relationship. It's a tough one to integrate because you have to learn to accept your spouse's emotional changing nature. More signs in the 7th house. Leo owning the 7th house for Aquarius. This one is difficult as both personalities are very strong. Aquarius, don't forget, is co-ruled by Rahu, maybe primarily ruled by Rahu. And Rahus are very eccentric. They're very kind of ego-based. They like a lot of attention. Leos are also strong characters. Their life is all about status and advancing. So you put the two together in a relationship, you get problems because the trick here is that you have to be respectful of each other's independence. And, my wife and I have a very independent marriage. We're both independent and we kind of honor each other's independence. And that's why our marriage is successful, because we let each other do our own things sometimes, and we don't get needy about it. But if you can't do that with the Leo Aquarius thing, it's a problem. Signs in the 7th house. Virgo owning the 7th house for Pisces rising. Again, Virgo partners are difficult as they seek perfection and they cannot get through the flaws of their partner. Don't forget, Virgo is that funny, perfectionistic sign of the zodiac. It just is so critical and it gets very picky of its partners. And Pisces is so idealistic and they're interested in meditation and spiritual pursuits, and Virgos are so practical. They're one of the business signs, and there's a real clash between Pisces and Virgo because it's God versus business. So you have to really kind of expect. If you get that kind of a combination, you have to accept your partner's imperfections, and accept that your partner's spiritual interests. Libra owning the 7th house for Aries rising. Aries can be too possessive and controlling when to attract pretty partners, and don't forget, Aries are very independent. Mars likes to do everything alone, and Libra wants to do everything together, and so there's this kind of sometimes this can be a mess with passion and problems with independence, dependence. Not getting too caught up in possessiveness and jealousy. This can be a potential mess sometimes if the planets are very afflicted. It can work. Don't forget, Venus is a marker for Aries, so because it owns the 2nd and the 7th house. So when relationships don't work, they create illness, sometimes even death. Right? If that relationship will kill you. Scorpio owning the 7th house for Taurus rising. So a lot of strong sexual energy here with Mars owning the 7th and the 12th houses. Taurus is kind of need passionate partners, and Scorpio sometimes can be. I think I mentioned to you this. Mars is the celibate. Scorpio is a very spiritual sign. I'm Scorpio. I'm actually, there were times I was very interested in sex, but innately I've kind of come to understand that I want to channel my energies toward spirituality, and I'm in a marriage where my wife has more sexual needs, and it can be at odds here. Ideally you want to match a good, you need good sexual compatibility for a Taurus Scorpio to kind of work, and the acceptance of the differences between materiality and spirituality have to be taken into account. Sagittarius for Gemini rising. Sagittarius owning the 7th house here. So a strong Jupiter here will create a strong husband, since Jupiter is the Karaka for husband. Multiple marriage is possible with Sagittarius as a dual sign. Gemini will have to realize that their Sagittarius partner needs a lot of independence and freedom in their spiritual quest. Again, Sag is a very kind of spiritual sign, and so Geminis have to again realize their spiritual nature. And again, there's the Boudica problem here. So a lot of these kind of repeat because we're just going to the other side of it. Capricorn, Cancer, same problem with emotion versus business ethics. Aquarius, Leo, again, too many egos involved unless you become independent. Pisces, Virgo, same thing, conflict between spirituality and. So anyway, let's look at a lot of this other stuff left to say for the relationship class, but I have it here in the charts for you. Let's look at your charts because I've talked way more than I usually do, and that's because this material is so fascinating that I wanted to go over and not get too lost in studying. I mean, we'll have 6 classes to study relationship charts, so we'll do that. So I'm going to have to let me open it up for questions. I may have muted you, and then really bad. It's unusual that I lecture this much because I usually don't lecture this much. So I'm going to I'm going to have to put in your chart data if we're going to look at it. So I think I only have a couple in here. This is my other computer. I've got Sonara, who isn't here. And I've got Vikas, and I'm not sure he wants to be guinea pig for his first day in class. So
I'm fine with it. If you want to use my chart, I'm fine.
Okay. Okay, so I haven't looked at Vikas' chart for a long time. I just happen to have it on this computer that I transferred my data to. And what we do when Vikas, what we do often, I often ask you to kind of share, your experience. I will make some observations, and then I will ask you to kind of help us go deeper by validating what.
Sure.
So, and again, Vikas was born in India, but when he moves to New Jersey, he has a different chart. He's got an Aries rising chart. So it's something that I do take into account. But in this, I like to look at the natal chart just in terms of kind of innate qualities. So the thing that Vikas is a Virgo rising, and so Pisces owns the 12th house. He's got Saturn and Rahu in Pisces. Now we like Saturn in the 7th house because it does create mature possibility. Saturn is also the Atmakarka for the chart, planet with the highest number of degrees. So there's a lot of maturity with Saturn in the 7th house here. The affliction with Rahu is pretty tight. We're seeing it's at the same degree. And so that Saturn is pretty afflicted. And probably until you got involved in a lot of meditation and spiritual practice, there might have been a lot of anxiety in your younger life. Ketu in the 1st house is going to make one who's devoted to their partner. And I sometimes use the word kind of codependent, in that they'll put their partner's needs ahead of their own needs. That can if one can do that, that can be very successful if there's no resentment that builds up. If you're so devoted to your partner that you can do that. Again, I'm just looking at the natal chart here using some of the principles that we learned. Normally we would think Rahu afflicted in the 7th house would cause a lot of problems in a relationship. And I think probably because you moved from India that's not the case, and you have a lot of spiritual maturity. But do you want to share anything about your chart with the class based on, and I just threw out a couple of quick things, which is all I can do.
Sure. Can you hear me now clearly, Barry?
Yeah.
Okay, so some things to note from my life. I had a couple of business partnerships which really went sour. So initially it went very well because I started basically my career working and then as a side business, and that did start doing really well. But then I sort of got, in a way, backstabbed by a couple of my partners. So two different scenarios, and I was just not able to overcome it. So basically I sold or whatever, just got out of it. So there definitely, it created a significant amount of anxiety for me and a lot of stress. But in marriage, luckily, so initially it was going a little rough because it's just we came from very different backgrounds, and it was a lot of learning for me. And I think in a way, Jyotish has been a saver for me, because the more I look at the charts, rather than looking at the partner and saying, you know what, I want a perfect partner, Virgo being picky, I want, or being too critical, more reflecting back and saying, no matter what it is, I have to get through it. And that initially, once I went past the couple of first few years, and I think things started becoming fairly easy, and then we sort of matured together in the relationship.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, good. So interesting. So that Saturn Rahu conjunction in your first chart is really, we often have to remember it can be business partners too, and in this case, it's a pretty challenging, placement here, and it did manifest as business partner relationship. Okay, thank you for sharing that. That's great. Okay, anybody want to volunteer to go next? Because I have to write you in. I've got your. Go ahead.
Oh,
Jamie?
I wouldn't mind.
Charlene, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Charlene. So tell me your data really quickly because it got erased when I transferred.
Sure. It's July 1st, 1981.
Okay.
Time is 8:42 a.m.
Okay.
City is New Rochelle, New York.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to add you. Okay. So Charlene again is Cancer rising with Venus and Rahu in the first and Ketu in the seventh. So if we just go by, so a couple of things. So we've got the conflict between Cancer and Saturn, which always brings up trust issues because when Saturn owns the seventh house, there's always kind of a trust issue that comes up, and it becomes a central issue of a Cancer Capricorn relationship. Your Saturn is actually very strong, being in Virgo in the third house and conjunct Jupiter. So in a sense, I think it's saved from that. Again, you've got the Rahu Ketu dialogue, and I think we've talked about how you need to attract devoted partners because you're a very charismatic personality, and if you don't find somebody who's just able to kind of serve you in a very devoted relationship, then you're going to have challenges with it. Venus in the first, actually, we said is really wonderful because it can bring a lot of self-love, and that I think can transfer into accepting other partners at times. But Venus is very kind of close to Rahu within a degree, and so a lot of the positive qualities of the Venus being in the first house are a little bit lost and challenged by that close affliction. It's still creating incredible beauty and charismatic energy, but at the same time, whenever you have Rahu Ketu in the first house, there's always some problems with self-doubt and things like that. And because the ascendant Lord Moon is in the 12th, I mean, there isn't enough self-love to be accepting enough of partners that aren't working. Anyway, that's my quick five and dime analysis. Do you want us to share anything, Charlene?
Yes. So basically, I have not had luck when it comes to relationships, whether it's romantic or just like with friendship. It always seems to kind of just be transient in that regard. In regards to like romantic relationships, yeah, I would say I tend to attract men who are not stable or can equally bring anything to the table. So yeah, basically I haven't had luck in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did mention that Jupiter, the Karaka for husband, is pretty afflicted because it's 1 degree from Saturn, and it's also in the sign of Virgo, which is an enemy sign, and Mercury, the dispositor of Virgo, is in the 12th house retrograde, and so there are other components to some of the issues that you're dealing with, and so but thank you for sharing. Okay, anybody who would like to go next? You're gonna have to write your data in.
I'll be happy to go next, Barry.
Okay, Jamie. So I didn't have time to edit. Okay, I didn't have time to this, Jamie. Okay, Jamie, tell me your data again.
121.79.
Okay.
1357 at 1357.
Yeah.
Pueblo, Pueblo, Colorado.
Here, we got it right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it's not right because I'm coming up with I got James.
Oh wait, I thought that. Oh wait, you've got Charlene displaying.
Yeah, I don't know why I did that. I sometimes this program. Okay, there you are. Jamie's Taurus rising, with Venus in the 7th in Scorpio, and Lord of Scorpio, Lord of the 7th house, Mars, is in exact degree with the Sun, and it's actually a thing called cosme in medieval astrology, where the planet actually takes on the Sun's energy, the heart of the Sun, which is divinity. It becomes a very spiritual. So my postulation with the exalted Mars and Casime's Mars is that Jamie will eventually attract a very spiritual man into her life. When he will come, we'll have to learn when we learn on timing relationships in lesson 5. But what we did, in a sense, without getting too personal, is Taurus with Venus and Scorpio. I mean, one would think that, and ideally finding a very sexual partner for you will be important. And it's just kind of, Libras and Taurus is just, they need touch, they need sexuality, and it's really kind of part of the package. Venus and Scorpio could be a little bit out of balance, and so, we'd have to look at other aspects of the chart to see, what would happen with that. And I know you I think you shared before that relationships have been frustrating. We'd have to look in the Devamsha chart too. We've got, we've got Saturn in the 1st, and Mars in the 7th, in the Devamsha chart. So, even though we're optimistic looking in the Rashi chart, what happens to Mars in the Navamsha chart goes into the 7th, where you might attract two aggressive partners, Mars Sun conjunction. So, and then Saturn's kind of aggravating it. So, there's a lot of frustration with partnership in the Navamsha chart. Jamie, you want to share anything? I'm initial observations.
No, that's very true. And relationships, they come along, they just kind of blow up, or separations and competition. So yeah, it's a rough push-pull kind of thing.
Yeah, so we'll have to. I may have to add a lesson on remedies in the relationship course. Maybe I'll get rid of something else, because I think ultimately we have to kind of really always focus on remedies. You know, what is it going to take? What is it going to take to work through
I think it's karma.
this karma? This is a very challenging relationship chart. I mean, it's just Mercury conjunct Rahu too in the third.
Yes, I've been studying it and I'm living it. So
Yeah. Okay.
agreed.
Okay. Edit. Okay. Okay. So who wants to go next? You don't have to go if you don't want to go. I always try to get through examples in the class so that it's personal. Anybody? You could do Sonora even though she's not here. Anybody else want to volunteer? Okay. You don't have to volunteer. I don't want to get too personal. I know it's a little. Relationships can be intimate. You know, Venus likes to be intimate. So I'm doing a relationship course starting Saturday. We're going to have to be intimate. I shared all kinds of terrible things today with you. What can I do? Okay, honesty. That's important. Okay, so here's Sonora's chart, and this is not Sonora's chart. I don't know why it's doing this. Okay, here's Sonora's chart. Hopefully she's back in Mumbai now. Okay, Leo rising, Sun in the 10th. Okay, so again, she's a career woman. Saturn and Rahu in the first, is challenging for self-identity, and when your self isn't strong, then you're going to have more problems with your partner, right? Sonora just got married, and with Rahu in the first, she's actually a very strong, charismatic person. And she's going to be very close to her partner with Lord of the Seventh in the first. But K2 in the seventh means she really needs a kind of devoted person. Again, she's got the Leo Aquarian pull, and we said that that's about independence. Both Leos and Aquarians tend to be very independent, and if you don't accept your partner's independence, and if you're needy for attention, then the relationship could be challenging. So that's what I get there. Looking at the Navamsha chart, it's kind of blessed with Venus and Jupiter in the first. So it suggests that you'd have very strong relationship skills to work in a relationship. Lord of the seventh in the Navamsha chart is Mars in the 12th conjunct Rahu. Suggest a foreign partner, and she indeed kind of did marry a man from Denmark, even though she lives in India. So, one would think that Lord of the seventh in the first, Lord of the seventh in the 12th, when the Mars Rahu conjunction is particularly challenging in the Navamsha chart. When we study that, we'll look at that in more detail. Okay, any other volunteers? Otherwise, it's almost 4 o'clock. Any?
Barry, you can use me if you want to, or if you want to move on to something else, it's fine.
Okay, Kathy. We're going to have to put you in. My computer person. Kathy. Okay, Kathy, tell me your birth date again.
23rd of March, 1957. 57, yeah.
What time again, Kathy?
Well, you figure it's 1512, 3:12 p.m.
Okay. And then you were born in Alberta?
Calgary.
Calgary.
Yeah, Calgary, Alberta.
Okay, so Kathy is Leo rising. She's got the seventh lord again is Aquarius. So again, we have that kind of two independent people going on possibly in the marriage. The Lord of Aquarius is Rahu, which is in the third, or Saturn, which is in the fourth. no major planets in the first seventh axis. You know, I kind of think that's good. You know, I think you know, that kind of means that there wasn't a lot of tensions and karma kind of being in the way. And so I think that was probably a blessing. In the Navamsha chart, we've got Mars in the first and Mercury in the seventh. Mars obviously creates a little bit of Kuja dosha in the first, so there could be some desire to be in control when you have Mars in the first in the Navamsha chart. And that could lead to arguments with Mercury in the seventh in the Navamsha chart. But anyway, Kathy, you want to share anything?
Yeah, my first marriage when I was quite young, probably that Mars in the first was part of the disaster. He had Kuja dosha in the Rashi chart, and my Leo's ascendant, he has a sun there, so it was probably a big power struggle.
A lot of fighting.
The main issue. The second, though, we were more independent. His ascendant was Aquarius and moon there, actually, and that was much more harmonious. But as you know, he's on the other side now, so I'm kind of functioning quite independently and, you know, comfortable with that now.
Right. And so your second marriage, in the, you look at the ninth house, and so we get Ketu in the ninth house in Aries, which is, you know, actually Ketu and Mars are friends. That's although it's at 30 degrees, so I'm wondering if it's right. It's right on the cusp here. I'm going to have to see why that's coming up that way. And Mars in this chart in Taurus. Was your husband a techie or a mathematician, or was he very spiritual, or are any of those true?
The second one?
Yeah.
Second one was an artist.
Yeah, artist.
Yeah, but I'd say he's very techie also. He has lots of skills, both worlds.
Okay, so last call for any volunteers to look at charts. And I'm sorry I can't get to anybody else that is watching this on tape. It's because my computer hard drive filled up and I had to transfer my data to this drive, and I didn't get it all transferred before the class. So still dealing with this Mercury Gandanta. Any final any thoughts? Did you enjoy this material? I think it's really kind of fascinating. I'm thinking of using this tape as a promo for the relationship course. So I may put it on public. And is everybody okay sharing their laundry if it goes on YouTube? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows, but I think you're all honest and intimate, and it's not a problem. Is that okay if I do that? If not, I won't. You can email privately if it's a problem. I'm thinking of doing that. But any final comments about relationship?
So one thing, Barry, the way I had learned it, and again, you sort of alluded to it, is that if you look at the Lord of the Ascendant and the Lord of the Seventh, they're at best always neutral to each other, never friends. So obviously the enemy shows up in the Leo rising and the Aquarius rising and the Cancer rising, and rest all the signs are always at best neutral. So it shows that you always have to work at a relationship. It's never going to be easy no matter what rising sign we have. So just another way I remember it, if it's of value.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think I was just bringing personal experience. I think relationships are always work because it's first and seventh house. It's the enemy. It's enemy territory. It's foreign enemy territory. So in a sense, by nature, it's our backside. There's always a problem. I think certain rising signs do better. I mean, I think I think, and if you look at the notes which are later in the slideshow that we didn't get to, like if you have Taurus rising in the Navamsha, it's really wonderful for relationships. There's certain combinations. I mean, there are people that their relationships just work really well. They don't struggle that much, and they just, you actually meet an awful lot of people like that. I mean, you hear more about the people who don't work, but there are combinations that are better than others, I think. That's my opinion. It's also the rising sign in the Navamsha chart. I think I put it in this slideshow. If I didn't, it'll be in the relationship course. But like Taurus rising is the best rising sign to have in the Navamsha chart, particularly, and you want Venus well placed. In Kathy's chart here, we've got Aries rising, but Scorpio and Aquarius in rising in the Navamsha chart are always going to bring the most karmic energy. Did I answer your question, Vikas? It's an opinion.
Yes, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So next week we're going to do a integration class because we've had some extra videos on some houses and we haven't. So next week is going to be an integration class where we're going to kind of review and add some things to all the houses that we studied, and we're going to practice with them, and then we're going to do a little bit more theory. So next week's kind of a midpoint of our Secret of the Houses class, and then I believe we're going to go into the Tricona houses next, 1, 5, and 9. So that'll be coming up in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to officially stop the videotape. I have to. We've had an ice storm here. I'm going to have to run out fairly quickly and buy some sand and salt before it gets too dark and I can still drive. But I'm going to officially end the class here, although I don't know where the so I'm stopping the recording.